Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio .world. It's me, your host, Tony B, of our regular Friday discussion of the impacts of the coronavirus on South Seattle and surrounding communities. When we started this off at 1 o'clock, we heard from Steve Byrne, public affairs officer for the Seattle Chapter Division, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the FBI, and the field offices that surround this area around the Northwest as well. We just heard from Hal Burnton, reporter, journalist for the Seattle Times based out of Portland. In both conversations, what we talked about was domestic terrorism. And of course, everything that happens right now happens on top of a current pandemic. And a bit buried in the autopsies of Tuesday night's presidential debate, with the sitting president refusing to clearly denounce white supremacists and repeatedly undermining the legitimacy of the coming election. Again, it reminds us that all of these things are exacerbated because there is a pandemic. But there was a telling block of discussion dedicated to economic issues, specifically the nation's recovery from the pandemic-fueled downturn. And it was probably too much to ask for this discussion to be predicated on the basic fact that many of our problems in this arena are rooted in our failure and really the national government's decision to stop trying to contain the virus. Wallace suggested that the president insist that we're seeing what's called a V-shaped recovery from the economic meltdown, and Joe Biden called it a K-shaped. In the V-shaped, we'd be seeing a strong recovery across the board. The K-shaped refers to the notion that the recovery is actually being experienced differently by different people. The rich have recovered swiftly and comprehensively. Those well off are still struggling and even experiencing continuing decline. This was presented as an open question, one that was a matter of opinion or political ideology, but this is a thing that is knowable. The Washington Post made that clear on Thursday. The economic collapse sparked by the pandemic is triggering the most unequal recession in modern U.S. history, living a mild setback for those at or near the top and a depression-like blow for those at the bottom. Well, recessions often hit poor households harder, but this one is doing it at such a scale that is the worst in generations. The analysis backs this up. So while the nation overall has regained nearly half of the lost jobs, several key demographic groups have recovered more slowly, including mothers of school-age children, black men, black women, Hispanic men, Asian Americans, younger Americans aged 25 to 34, and people without college degrees. The graphics in this post piece make the situation abundantly clear. More well-off groups have largely recovered during the pandemic and were less likely to lose their jobs and income in the first place. Stock market's booming, but only a little more than half of Americans actually own any equities, and according to CNN, the wealthiest 10% of households own 87% of stocks and mutual funds. Meanwhile, poorer Americans, more likely to work jobs that you can't do from home in industries disrupted by the virus or the lockdowns, are seeing none of those market gains. We were already living in two Americas, but now we're experiencing two economies and two recessions. That's on top of two pandemics, where these same groups are also more likely to contract the virus and die from it. So I'll say that again. We're experiencing two economies, two different types of recessions, and two pandemics. There are groups of folks who are suffering from this pandemic, the health portion of it, disproportionately. And the president has proven to be either incapable or unwilling to grasp this reality. Maybe the president and the first lady testing positive might change that. In ABC News Town Hall this month, President Trump declared that stocks are owned by everybody and added, look, we're having a tremendous thing in the stock market, and that's good for everybody. But people that aren't rich own stock, and they have 401ks. Maybe he feels like he has no choice but to say this to trumpet the strength of the economy that he's been overseeing, or maybe, I don't know. He just sees it as weakness or associated with weakness. But the gap between his message and many people's actual day-to-day lives, this might cost him. Of the many things that helped him pull out the last election, Democrats misjudged the economic state of the country. While on the surface, the Obama administration had overseen a dramatic rebound in employment and GDP growth since the Great Recession in 2009, and the growth of inequality began to slow down in Obama's second term, the recovery, again, was not shared equally. That was true based on income and wealth level, as richer Americans experienced a full recovery, while poorer Americans did not, and it reflected structural inequalities along racial lines. It was also true along geography. Smaller cities, say in the industrial Midwest, never really recovered from the economy turning bad, which rounded off decades of decline in manufacturing. In the meantime, Trump lied flagrantly about the state of the Obama economy and continues to. But for some, this message likely resonated, and the Republican candidate at the time may have been trying to attack the Obama record as a whole, but the rhetoric might have landed most with the people who felt the top line numbers, which showed an economy that had returned to good health and actually did not represent their experiences. The core of Trump's appeal to his base supporters was fear and resentment of a changing world. This threat crystallized by changing demographics in the ascension of Barack Obama to the presidency. There are 40% of people who the polling suggests support President Trump unconditionally. But he could not really have won without roping in some other voters along the way, along the margins, who were faced with the choice of being between a steady and professional hand who says things are largely on track and a chaos vector pledging to shake things up. Who went after the latter. We'll be back to talk more about this and share more information about the economy and, again, this V-shaped recovery as opposed to this K-shaped recovery right after this. Rainier Avenue Radio. Rainier Avenue Radio presents All Music, All Day Saturday. Music, all day Saturday.
This is Edwin Bailey, Bulldog Blue.
Jazz from the Cabinets.
That's right, it's time once again for Jazz from the Cabinets with Big Poppy.
Star Time.
Thanks for tuning in. My name is Paul Pierce. This is Star Time.
Saturdays, all music, all day. Reggae Hour. K-Fox Night.
Looking for the perfect beat? Yeah, it's the beat of the Fox.
Fresh Juice with D-Money in the group.
Myself, D-Money. Nice Eyes Patrol.
Taylor Hart.
Resistencia. The Northwest Rap Game.
DJ Medina. Chad Cheddar. Northwest Rap Game.
Sergio LaCour's Love Line.
It's Sergio's Love Lines with Sergio LaCour. Go to the phone line. Tell her who we talking.
Sea Monster Radio. Mo Jams is your jam.
We're live. Welcome to Mo Jam Mondays. This is KZ of KZ Music Media. Caller Goddess for Mo Jam Mondays.
Just my opinion. God is inspiration. Music. All day and all night. Saturdays on RainierAvenueRadio.org.
This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio.
An NPR analysis of EPA air quality data found that nearly 50 million people in California, Oregon, and Washington live in counties that experienced at least one day of quote-unquote unhealthy or worse air quality during wildfire season so far this year. That's 1 in 7 people in the U.S., an increase of more than 9 million people compared to 2018, the worst previous year. NPR's analysis looked at air quality on days from July to January of each year, specifically focusing on small inhalable particles that can lodge deep in the lungs and be harmful to humans. An EPA spokesperson said this kind of pollutant, known as PM 2.5, is the most likely culprit found in the air from wildfire smoke. Very unhealthy air lingered for an average of 4.1 days this year, more than twice as long as the average over the previous decade.
And that's your news on Rainier Avenue Radio.
If you're an older adult or someone of any age with underlying medical conditions, you're at a higher risk for severe illness from COVID-19. Look, the good news is there are steps you can take to protect yourself and loved ones. Wash your hands often. Stay home unless you need food, medicine, or medical care. If you need to go out, stay at least 6 feet away. Avoid people who are sick and make a plan. Identify and talk with someone who can help care for you if you get sick. Have supplies like medicine and groceries on hand, or find ways to have them brought to you. And remember, wear a cloth face covering when around others. For more information, call Seattle King County Public Health at 206-477-3977. That's 206-477-3977.
Naguna lebu kaya and the round tango makatali na rambula and lewe bunga in the vacuum kenda mai and a songo ni vata for a leo and the umaga kawu sivi kebaka and the maro and on the bula mendan the chico golinga and on the loma ni vale kamenda gaivela vayaki golinga Ito tumba kebaka engandrepi in the via volleyball lako mendala kingarabi baka bunuai sena tambana nimbula menda baka waki kenda mai ena songo ni baka leo the raida o baka waki ko mai beira na tamate na rote ni ona na futi kebaka ko mani lako ena dona bunua era tio kina baka leo na tamate tabuyani Tau kauta boli, kan daramaka na viving ona, no mi tawo i tatangumaki, sena cloth face covering. Me rao ni tangumaka kataroba, na manu ni mate, ena kena delta tolo. Ena ngauna ko vosa kina, se ena ngauna ko suru kina, se ena ngauna ko bubu kina. Na tawo i tatangumaki, na kakuni baka yanga takibira na ngoni lalai. Kalele somo na non rebaki nimbula ena mai na embaki rua ke va ko ningan rebo tale e so nei tuku mata lalai na balata na tatang ko maki mai na COVID-19 ngai ve tar mai ena na bani tale boniongo rua ono saiva va vitu tolu diwa vitu rua ono saiva va vitu tolu diwa vitu vinaga bogalia.
This is Paul Pearson, host of Star Time, and when I'm not meeting Mrs. Jones in that cafe for a chat and nothing else, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. In our special coverage of the impact of the coronavirus on South Seattle and surrounding communities. If you're just tuning in earlier, we had an opportunity to talk to Steve Byrne, Public Affairs Officer for the Federal Bureau of Investigation Seattle chapter. Tried to get as much information out of him as I could regarding domestic terrorism. I understand the place that he's in, but again, that is the entity that is charged with protecting us. And this is it is clearly a heightened time in regards to the potential for violence with the divisive election place that we're at right now, where Tuesday the president would also not clearly say that and has been saying that there, may not be a peaceful transition if he loses, and has been setting this up by claiming the potential for voter fraud. Now, there's also been the suggestion that he's asking his voters to show up at the polls and watch. We also heard the stand back and stand by commentary directed to the Proud Boys, which was a win for white supremacist groups. So that led us to the conversation. Also joining us was Hal Burnton from the Seattle Times, who's been covering the protests in Portland and Seattle, and primarily Portland, and he shared his opinion about, as a journalist, what he saw in this regard. All of this is impacted and affecting how we live based off of the coronavirus pandemic. And so before we left, I was talking about the economy and how that was working during recovery. I'm going to share more information about that with you in a second here. But first, I want to talk about our efforts during this electoral season to make sure that you are provided the opportunity to become a more informed voter by providing you with information directly from the candidates. We're going to be having debates all month long in October. We're going to be having interviews with candidates. We'll have discussions with folks from areas all over the state, from Pierce County to Snohomish County, King County, Clark County, Benton County, Central Washington, Eastern Washington. The goal is to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to get information, no matter where you live. There may be even the potential that for some of you who live in some of the more rural areas, you may find that you have more in common with some of the folks who live in the more urban areas in regards to what you consider to be important or what the issues are that you are concerned about impacting your community. Or maybe you'll find out that there are other people who feel differently. Either way, the goal is to help you become a more informed voter. Rainier Avenue Radio World's 2020 Community Election Connection is powered by the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle and Seattle Academy of Arts and Sciences. And next week's broadcast, beginning October 5th, we'll have Monday at 5 p.m., the Supreme Court Justice Debate. And this is for Supreme Court Justice position number 6, the candidate debate, and the incumbent is Justice G. Helen Whitener, and Richard Stearns is also running for this position. That's live October 5th at 5 to 6 p.m. And then also on Tuesday, an introduction to the Washington State Debate Association. Our guest is Whitney Keys, Executive Director of Seattle City Club and the Washington Debate Association. We'll find out more about who they are, and after what we just saw from the last presidential election last Tuesday, I think maybe you'd like some more insight on how these things are put together and what's supposed to happen. Again, here at Rainier Avenue Radio, we're hosting a number of different debates. But so Tuesday next week, Whitney Keys from the Seattle City Club and the Washington Debate Association will be joining us to talk about how they put debates together and how this whole thing works and maybe what's expected in the debate. And then on Wednesday, following the vice presidential debate, we will have the gubernatorial debate. Yep, so make sure tune in for the gubernatorial debate, 8 to 9. And then we're not done. That's only Wednesday. On Thursday, it's the Black Candidates Forum. This is, again, something put on by the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. This will be hosted by City of Tacoma Mayor Victoria Woodards. And on the show, joining Victoria will be Marilyn Strickland, who is running for the United States House of Representatives for the 10th Congressional District. Mayor Woodard will be talking to former mayor of Tacoma, Strickland, who again is running. You know, this is congressional seat. This will be your D.C. representative. Also being interviewed during the Black Candidate Forum debate for Pierce County will be Tawana Nobles, who is running for the 28th District, Washington State Senate. And there's more. Melanie Morgan is running for the Washington State House of Representatives for the 29th District. So 3 black women, 3 candidates who are running in Pierce County as part of the Black Candidate Forum that will take place on Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. Brought to you by, again, sponsor of our community election connection, Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. Also an additional sponsor is Seattle Academy of Arts and Sciences. So that's the schedule for next week. Quickly getting back to what I was talking about before, the pandemic, and you know how this stuff all kind of ties together. And although we didn't get a lot of information, I don't think, out of that debate, maybe some of y'all did. One of the things that was kind of glossed over was this concern and this talk about the economy. And in an exchange, Chris Wallace, who was the moderator, suggested that while the president insists we're seeing a V-shaped recovery from the economic meltdown, Joe Biden called it a K-shaped recovery. In the V-shaped recovery, we'd see a strong recovery across the board. In the K-shaped recovery, this is the notion that the recovery is actually being experienced differently by different people. The rich have recovered swiftly and comprehensively, and those who are less well off are struggling and even experiencing continuing decline. So what I was saying before is that we are experiencing different things. This has shown us that we are living in 2 different Americas. You know, George Floyd, that incident, at least we're having the discussion now about systemic racism, which, again, you know, from the president, I don't know, they won't say that, but we know that we're living in 2 different Americas. But we're also experiencing 2 different economies. Those who are well off are recovering much faster than those who were poor to begin with. We're experiencing 2 different recessions. So, you know, we will continue to do these episodes on the impact of the coronavirus on South Seattle and surrounding communities. And as we found out earlier, it's bigger than this, but we want to make sure that the folks in our South Seattle community are represented, that their issues and concerns are represented. And one way to do that is to make sure that you are informed voters. And so all month long during our community election connection, we will be awareing you, informing you, and bringing you candidate debates. We'll also be talking about the initiatives on the ballot, pro and con, so that you can decide and discern for yourself and make the best, most informed vote that you possibly can. We are going to take a break here, and when we come back, we'll return to our coronavirus special right here on Rainier Avenue Radio .world.